Hi, this is Roger Horowitz of the Hagley Library, coming to you with another episode of Hagley History Hangout, where we bring to you interviews with authors and researchers who have made use of our collections and done really interesting things with that work. Today, we're with Wendy Woloson, who is a longtime friend of Hagley and currently the acting chair of the Department of History at Rutgers University, Camden. Wendy, thank you for coming and talking with us today.
Thank you for having me. This is very exciting.
Well, as you know, I've been looking forward to this book for a long time. The book,
So hi.
the book is called "Crap," and the subtitle is "A History of Cheap Stuff in America." Wendy has done some papers at Hagley about that, so this is great for her to be able to talk about it. So let me ask you to start off, Wendy. Tell us what inspired you to write this book. What questions drove you to engage in this project?
Sure. So yeah, that's a great question. I am a scholar of material culture and consumer culture, especially in the 19th century. And the more research I did, the more I became, frankly, kind of frustrated by what I was finding in the literature, particularly about material culture studies. I'd read these great, lavishly illustrated books on, say, Fabergé eggs or Chippendale chairs or masterworks. And that's great. There's nothing wrong with those objects or the study of those objects. But, I came to think, well, these objects were rarefied things and not the things that ordinary people surrounded themselves with, or indeed what most of us have in our own homes today. And, I thought it was really curious that nobody had taken these very prosaic objects more seriously and interrogated what they meant to people in the past, especially, as the consumer revolution was unfolding, and what they mean to us today. And so I just started to get more curious about that and wanted to dig into that a little bit more. And also to better understand not just the material objects themselves, but, a kind of to understand like the intellectual history, if you will, of ordinary people, which I think was often recorded in their things, or at least that's the evidence that we have left of this kind of intellectual history.
So it's sort of a history of popular material culture.
Right, just ordinary goods for ordinary people. And it struck me that like nobody had really done this before. And so it wasn't, to be clear, it wasn't just the novelty of the project that attracted me to it, but I really felt like we need to understand more about the things that surround our lives today, and the history, the deeper, much deeper history of those things, where those things came from, and how we came to be the consumers that we are today.
Well, perhaps appropriately, I do see Elvis on your right shoulder there, holding up
Yeah,
the book.
yeah.
There you go. I mean,
And
would you see?
he's flocked. This is like a velveteen flocking that, it's like I love this thing.
Well, before I ask you bigger questions, let's just talk about Elvis for a second here. You have an
Sure.
Elvis there, and you love it.
Yeah.
Can you look at yourself as a consumer and say why Elvis in this kind of setting, which of course is not something that you have a scholarly interest in or anything like that? Why Elvis? What does
So,
this mean to you?
well, I love this particular object because let's get him in camera because it's Elvis. So he's this iconic American symbol. He's also been appropriated for very kitschy things. So, he's got another layer of meaning here. And then this particular one is homemade. So he's got like so you can see his features are like hand painted. And as I said, like he's got this velveteen kind of finish. And then, like it's sort of it's hard to see, but like there's paint that's been sort of, so it's kind of this quaint and sincere yet kind of crappy object. And I just love him so much.
Very appropriate. So let's kind of telescope this back out there. And
Sure.
can you tell us what you mean by crap? And can you tell us some of the varieties of crap that you look at in your book? Those are two separate questions, but
Okay. Yeah.
because one thing which is nice about your book, among many things that's nice about your book, is you break it down into some different varieties. That you create some
Right.
categories out of this broad term. Tell us kind of how you approach sorting out this notion of crap and giving it some sort of definition.
Yeah, that's a great question. So first, like, what do I mean by crap? And so for me, crap isn't like one particular thing, but it's a state of being of things. So crappiness, the degree of crappiness is, in my mind, the distance between what something promises and what it actually delivers. So these things are things that are often cheaply made, things that promise to do like miracle. We can talk about gadgets, but like these miracle things that will perform these things effortlessly and easily, but like don't work very well or create more work for you. They're often things that we don't need, that don't last very long, and often things that we don't even want, but just kind of end up accumulating in our lives. And I'm speaking about this in the present tense, but this was no less true for people in the past as well. And the varieties of crap is actually that question is related to your first question, because things are crappy in different ways. And so the way that I chose to organize my book was really around genres of goods that are crappy in particular ways. So gadgets are overpromise about function, mass-produced collectibles overpromise about value, and cheap goods, variety goods, five and dime goods overpromise about sort of economic value. So I try to unpack the ways that these things are crappy in different, in their own ways. And I should also say that what I've tried to do too is, of course, crap is a very judgmental term, but I've tried to let the evidence and the people in the past speak for themselves. So I have tried to not put my own judgments on this stuff, but to really let people speak for themselves and speak for their own relationships to these goods.
So you want to be respectful of another person's Elvis, if you will.
Yeah, for sure.
Why they might have those items that someone else might say, well, that's just a bunch of crap.
Right. And so, yeah, to be sure, like what is crappy to me might not be crappy to you. So for me, what might be a useless gadget that ends up in my kitchen junk drawer, for you is this, great like miracle garlic peeler or whatever. Some sort of like giveaway, toss away, like little tape measure that's just, really crappy. Like if you found that in your grandmother's sewing basket, that might be a really important heirloom for you. So in some ways, these are relative categories, but I think broadly speaking, they apply to a lot of people's relationships to a lot of goods.
A lot of goods. Well, can you give a starting date for when, if I may say, crap happened?
It's
How far how,
actually,
how far
yeah,
back can this
right.
crap go?
It goes back much farther than we think. So in the United States, I would say, well, the costume jewelry industry starts at the end of the 18th century. So that goes pretty far back. And unfortunately, I didn't have a lot of time to get into that in my book. But one of the things that I do talk about in my book is like after the War of 1812 and the embargo, um, there's this glut of goods over, in Great Britain that they can't sell to Americans. And then after the embargo ends, they start shipping the stuff to American shores in the early 1820s, late 18 teens, early 1820s. And this is stuff that has been, stored up in warehouses over there that they haven't been able to sell to their own home markets because these are like textiles that the color fades, or cutlery that of brittle metal because it hasn't been hardened properly, just like really cheap, shoddy stuff that they can't sell over there.
Right, crap,
There's,
in other words.
it's crap, right? But there's such a pent up demand for those goods over here. And because they offer, early merchants offer both variety and low price, they become really attractive things to Americans very early on. And so the cheap goods stores, which are the the progenitors to like the five and dimes, those start to appear in American cities in the early 1820s, offering cheap variety goods for American consumers, and they consumers love this stuff.
So in a way, what you're saying is this is at the, if you will, the birth of American consumer culture.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think so, or at least the birth of kind of what I call the throwaway culture. I mean, um, this is sort of the origins of people's change in relationship from a more conservative relationship to the things that they own, where they care for things very carefully. They own very few objects that they pass down over generations, and those objects often perform various functions. Like your sturdy table might be your workshop during the day, and it might be the kitchen table at night, and maybe you fold it out and it becomes a bed that you sleep on. But then with this proliferation of cheap variety goods, people become enamored of this idea of novelty, and they start to prefer new things over the old. And so old things start to get cast off in favor of people looking ahead to these shiny new objects. And because a lot of these things are affordable, low priced, it becomes less of a risk or like a literal investment that people need to make in these things. And so if they do disappoint, that's kind of okay, because people can just buy something else that's also cheap to replace it.
Right. What's involved here is not just the beginning of a consumer culture, but if you will, a beginning of a transformation of a consumer culture into a different kind of consumer culture. Is that what you're saying?
For sure, yeah. So people's relationships to their possessions radically changes, even very early on in the 1820s, 1830s. And that just sort of snowballs. You get these like cheap one-price goods stores. And then, I'm sort of getting ahead, but then that turns into the five and dime. Fast forward, then we have the dollar stores of today, where we don't even expect to buy anything that's really of quality. Like, of course, this thing's going to be crappy. I got it at the dollar store.
Right, but we still buy it. Well, one of these items that you talk about that has its roots in this period are gadgets. And I particularly love your focus on
Yeah,
gadgets. It's one of your chapters. That's
yeah,
one of the ways you break this down. So let's talk about gadgets for a little bit. Tell
sure.
us what you mean by gadgets.
Well, gadgets are, these tools that promise to do certain forms of labor effortlessly, quickly, easily, and they promise to solve um, problems of work, and in that end up changing people's relationship to work. Um, why I say they're crappy is because they often don't live up to those promises. And those promises are often, as I said before, things that promise magic or miracles or, effortless, whatever, weight loss or fixing your balding hairline or, even something like peeling potatoes. A lot of these gadgets are centered around the home and in particular the kitchen. And so they promise to do all of these things very quickly, very easily, but often don't work or create more work because you have to clean them or whatever. Or, one of my favorites is the multi-tools that promise to do like 10 things in one, but don't really do any of them very well. There's an illustration in my book for this thing that's both a hatchet and a hammer. And I think that you would actually like hurt yourself if you use this thing for either of those functions. But that is kind of the epitome of gadgets, is this sort of extreme utility, this extreme function that just negates itself. Most of these gadgets don't really work.
I mean, in terms of gadgets, especially I think about the multi-tool
Yeah.
because I know these
We all
multi-tools.
have them. We all have
Well,
them.
so much of these items seem to be on the nature of gifts. In other
Yes.
words, people who are actual handy and do work usually don't go out and buy multi-tools because they have all the tools, but all the multi-tools I have
Hmm.
or the multi-tools I've purchased are the result of gifts. So I don't buy them for myself, but
Right.
I might give them to somebody when you're at desperation. So how is gift giving part of this novel, this gadgetry thing? I mean, is
Yeah.
it the individuals who want to solve the problem, or is it people who feel that gifts are necessary, who are part of that market?
I mean, that's an excellent question. And now that you mention that, I think I have two or three multi-tools, and they also came to me as gifts. Which, like, I'm not sure what to make of that. But yeah, I mean, and maybe I I know this isn't what you were getting at with your question, but um multi-tools are kind of the gadget version of gifts, like scented candles are. Like, I talk about scented candles in another chapter, but that's also kind of a gift that we tend to give people who it's like a kind of a neutral, um, but kind of like kind of crappy thing, or it represents. I mean, I'm hesitating here because this is a really interesting question, and you've cast it in a way that I haven't quite thought about this before. But I think these kinds of objects, especially if they come to us as gifts, reflect or might reflect a kind of tenuousness of that interpersonal relationship. It's a safe thing that I can give somebody that I either don't know very well, or somebody who's hard to please. I know that it's hard to give
Mm.
this person a gift. So something like a multi-tool or a scented candle has a certain kind of vanilla, if you excuse the pun, but like a vanilla neutrality that it's a safe thing, and probably for that reason it's kind of a crappy thing too, like materially and kind of psychically or emotionally. No offense to the people who gave you your
That's right.
multi-tools, of
That's right.
course.
Or my stepfather never used the ones I gave him. Well,
Right.
I'm not. This is actually not where I intended to ask, but you make me think of the essay by Daniel Miller, A Theory of Shopping,
Mm-hmm.
where one of the things he talks about, one of my favorite sections, he talks about people shopping in the supermarket, and the section is called "Making Love in the Supermarket." And what he says is that he's an anthropologist, that people are buying things in the supermarket that they think the people whom they are buying them for should have,
Mm-hmm.
should do. In other words, the purchasing is a social act. It's not, and again, this is very much against the idea that people just buy things because they want them. Well, maybe so, but so, and so the gift giving forms such an important part of your story. And gadgets, so many of these gadgets seem
Mm-hmm.
to be the kinds of items that someone who actually did the work would never purchase for themselves.
Right.
because they would have a better sense of what actually would be useful. And as part,
Right.
so that's why I really wonder about to what extent it's just the relationship of gift giving that facilitates these kinds of transactions.
Yeah. And, you know, so I don't really talk about gift giving in terms of gadgetry, but where that becomes more, to me, more interesting is in the like the free giveaways, the business gifts, the advertising specialties, the swag, call it whatever you want. But to me, that's a really interesting facet to this, where the market um, inserts itself into this
Mm.
otherwise very intimate process of gift giving, in order to, promote businesses and things like that. So by the end of the 19th century, you get this whole new um, this whole new kind of commodity, which is this business gift, which seems like an oxymoron, business gift. But people, advertising experts like this guy Henry Bunting, who I love, and Hagley has some of his works, wrote in like the 1890s about like entire books about advertising specialties and premiums, these giveaways, and how they would like warm the heart of the recipient if you would give them this nominal thing. And he acknowledged that these things were crappy. He described them as being promiscuously distributed. So it's interesting to me is that his argument, and I think it's a strong one, is that to form this relationship between producer and consumer, or seller and buyer, didn't require a special object to express that relationship or cement it, but it could be something as ephemeral as, a paper fan's business name on it, a calendar. He lists like 50 different things: change purses, paperweights, letter openers, pens, pencils, just this kind of crappy stuff. But he said, like, it warms the heart of the receiver,
Mm.
and it creates a loyalty from between the customer and the business. And I think he really was onto something there. Um, yeah,
But one thing you talk about in this section about these giveaways is just how big this business is.
yeah.
I mean, give us some ideas just how
It's like
large.
it's a multi-billion-dollar industry today that's global. And if you just think about the branded products that we have, one of the exercises that I do in my when I teach consumer culture to my undergraduates is I make them all tally the brands that are on their person and like in their backpacks and stuff. Like, how many branded things do you have? And then I get them to kind of better understand that, like, you are a walking advertisement for these different entities, whether you are aware of that or not. And that's the beauty of these giveaways. And even, the industry, even today, says that it's something like 80% of the free things that we each get, we give away, or we take to the thrift store. We de-accession them, if you will. They don't care. In fact, they think that that's good, because that is a way that we are helping to spread the word, the brand message of whatever business this is even further. And they don't have to do anything. So we become not just walking kind of billboards for companies, but we also spread their word further.
Well, I just was inspired to look around my
Sure.
desk, and I have here a pen,
Yeah.
Exhibit A, Lambertville Station Restaurant and Inn, where my wife and I went a few years ago, hanging around here. I have a cup from Rutgers University that was given to me by Phil Scranton.
Good.
For that, I have a Hagley anniversary. So we have all this stuff that's around us, and one of the
Yeah.
things I love is the way you say this stuff around you is not just a pen with a crappy pen, with a name on it, or a cup that was repurposed and given to you, but this is part of a larger phenomenon
Yeah.
that's out there in the marketplace, which is very, very big.
Yeah. And so and what happened over time was that
Or there's by
Mhm.
Phillies.
Sure.
So there we are.
Right. Exactly. Sometimes we buy them ourselves, sometimes they're giveaways, but I like to say free stuff isn't free because like if we go to the ball game to get the free giveaway, travel cup like you have, we often go early to make sure we can get that promotion, which means we spend more at the concession stands and so on. Even if you think about this in the nonprofit world, if you think about it, sort of free stuff generating these feelings of warmth and connection, in the nonprofit world, sometimes that gets translated into guilt. So say the SPCA sends me a solicitation for a donation and they include this tote bag that like I didn't ask for, I didn't want. But then I start to feel kind of guilty because they gave me this gift and like I probably should at least send them some money. So even for people like me who know better, like it works. It psychologically, there's something very interesting about how these offers of free stuff get you to give away either money or personal information or whatever it is. Yeah.
Right. Don't look a gift horse in the mouth, because there you
Right.
go there. Um, well, let me ask you another category of crap that you look at, which are novelties.
Novelties.
This is one of the I think one of the really deep sections. Although these are novelties, are not the kind of things you think are deep. What do you mean by novelties as a category of crap?
Yeah, so novelties, which I love, are like jokes and gags. So things like plastic vomit and exploding cigars and fart powder and like snakes in cans and things that buzz and pop and explode and are supposed to cause levity, humorous things and so on. Yeah, that's what I mean by novelty
Well, you,
goods.
you have, I mean, you have quite a few wonderful phrases in this book. My book is all dog-eared from phrases. And I think your best one, though, is about novelties. And you describe them as the demon spawn, the Salvador Dali, and Montgomery Ward. Wonderful phrase. And you go on to explain, what do you mean by that? Because that's a very complicated phrase, and one would not usually put Salvador Dali and Montgomery Ward in the
Right.
same sentence.
Well, I've got this thing about surrealism and how so just to go back a little bit. So novelty goods start showing up in merchandise catalogs in the 1870s. And in fact, Hagley has some really good novelty catalogs from like the Eureka Novelty Company and some other ones. And these things mostly came from Germany, eventually from Japan. Then there's a whole like global story about the sourcing of all sorts of forms of crap, which I know isn't what you asked me about. So novelties, but the point is that novelties have a pretty early history as well, and um, they they come in the form of cheap merchandise and they're particularly attractive to kids and especially boys who love pranking. And they do these weird things. They make people kind of rethink their relationship to material objects. If you think about something like a pack of gum that's actually made out of rubber or the exploding cigar, so objects that you are familiar with and expect to behave in a certain way start misbehaving and start doing things that you don't expect them to do. And of course that's why they're so attractive. They're fun to deploy onto other people to perpetuate or to perpetrate what I call these like petty violences on other people. So novelty goods are mean kinds of things. but I'm getting around to your initial question about surrealism. So one of the things that I point out in the book is that decades before surrealism became a kind of popular or well-known artistic movement, people who had bought novelty goods were already familiar with these weird, strange worlds of objects not doing what they expected them to do. And I think that's pretty interesting. And, you know, I'm not sure what we can make of that, except it goes back to my larger thesis about crappy things being contradictory goods. And in the case of novelties, these things that are seemingly the most ephemeral and the most clearly useless things are actually, I think, quite profound and revealing about our deeper seated emotions and desires and fears and aggression also. So yeah.
Well, let's talk about that aggression. I mean, you towards the end of the chapter, you kind of really get down on novelties. You describe them
Do I?
as mean spirited and corrosive. Well, I mean, this is
Yeah,
let's not just talk about the sunny side of these things. I mean, you have some
right.
stories to tell about how these novelties are not as sort of just gee whiz kind of funny. There's nothing else going on with these that you spent some time extracting.
Yeah, I mean, particularly the jokes and the pranks, the like the fake ink spills on a table. You know, I've got a lot of illustrations from catalogs that show particularly men perpetrating these novelty, these jokes to women. And in particular, making fun of women's prescribed roles. So, there's a picture of a woman sort of freaking out about this ink that's spilled onto her beautiful table. Well, it's fake ink and it's, a tipped over ink bottle and it's actually a piece of tin that's been colored and shaped to look like ink. But the point is that her domestic duties and all of her efforts are for naught. It isn't that funny that I'm making fun of that. Or getting a woman a box of rubber chocolates for her birthday. That's hilarious, right? Um, not really. Or having the fake bandage and making fun, fooling a woman into thinking something bad happened to you. And then, oh, isn't that funny that actually it didn't happen? And the gender component is really interesting. And again, these novelty catalogs are useful in showing us how people were expected to use these things. And when they're illustrated in action, it's almost always men doing things to women or boys doing things to girls, like boys using the squirting camera on a girl. So that the girls and the women become the victims often of these jokes, these pranks. And they're mean, they're mean.
So there's a hierarchy reinforcement that's in there as part of this appropriation of novelties.
For sure. And there's also kind of a bro culture, so men prank each other and often, giving them sexually suggestive things, boob cups and can I say boob cups? Things like that. So they can become kind of risque. But those are also obviously meant to denigrate women in some way. Yeah.
Yeah, so crap is not all fun and games. Now,
No.
several times you've alluded to the things you found at Hagley. So let me ask you about that. How we did as a research
Oh
library.
my gosh. I mean, I'm such a fangirl of the Hagley. And I have to say that every chapter of this book has something from the Hagley, either as an illustration or draws from an important source material. So I mentioned trade catalogs, and the trade catalogs I use, like I said, date all the way back to the 1870s. but also I was looking at things from like 1950s Japan, from the Hagley uh, industry literature. So, trade publications were really useful in giving me everything from statistics of production and consumption to marketing strategies. I mentioned Henry Bunting, who was this marketing professional at the turn of the century. You have several of his books on different advertising and marketing, approaches and philosophies. Things about five and dime stores, both catalogs, merchandise catalogs, and how-to books about how to run five and dime stores. Correspondence, business correspondence. I used a little bit from the Soda House manuscripts for the chapter on gadgets, and thinking about intellectual property and sort of small home-based businesses. There's a ton of other stuff, but in also graphics in here too. And I should say that it's not just Hagley's collection that's amazing, but that it's supported by such amazing professionals. So the collection can be its own thing, but it's only as useful as people can access it. And so the librarians there are just, fantastic. It's a great place to work.
Oh, gee whiz. There's our ad for the sponsor there. Well, I mean, one thing you also mentioned in your acknowledgments is that you yourself have an extensive crap-related research collection. How did you accumulate that?
Well, flea markets, eBay, here and there, antique malls, and I should say, we're sort of joking about it, but I find that, I mean, I use those. Let me back up. A better way to say this is I consider them artifacts. And so to me, they are useful as sources. They're useful as information. And so I'll just give one example, and that's in my chapter on mass-produced collectibles. It was very important for me to acquire some of these things, to acquire collectible plates. How were they packaged? What are they like materially? Are they cheap? Are they actually well made? What did the stamps look like on the back? How were the design printed on the front? Same thing for, I mean, this sounds kind of funny, but Beanie Babies. Like, if I'm going to make the argument that these are kind of crappy things and false collectibles, or not false collectibles, they're collectibles, but created a false value, I need to understand like what they are like materially, how they were made, how they compare to other things. So having this kind of stuff at hand, in addition to the literature that supports this, is really important. Yeah.
I mean, I suppose also having the catalogs which advertise them and have prices, and then if you can spot these items in an antique mall, and there are the prices that they're being sold for right there,
Yeah.
there's your information as to what's happened.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, one of the points you make is that these collectibles are marketed as an investment. You
Right.
buy things, and at some point down the road, and by and large, you say this is not the case, and
Right.
there's your evidence there.
Right. Right. And having the material thing also helps me to better understand the disparity between the thing itself and how it is marketed. And that's true for the contemporary things I look at, and true for things in the past. I mean, thanks to eBay, eBay to me is like this huge research trove. Because I don't necessarily buy everything I find, but even for the older catalogs from the 1880s, 1890s, those merchandise catalogs, I can often find, a similar object on eBay to what was advertised in these catalogs. And I can kind of tell what is between the puffery and the actual thing, the promise and the reality, which has been really helpful too.
Which, of course, brings you back to the point at the beginning, which is material culture. that
Yeah.
while you rely on print sources and everything like that, in the end, you try to bring it back to the object itself to understand
Mhm.
what it was and what it could do and what it couldn't do.
Yeah, and I think putting those objects in conversation with consumer psychology. So to me, in the end, this is really a history of consumer psychology. So it's not just the crappy stuff, but why we've been so attracted to it over time. Because, it's important to acknowledge that consumers have agency. We didn't have to buy this stuff over time. We don't have to buy it or accumulate it today, but we do. And why? And so unpacking and answering that why question to me has been really important and at the forefront of this project.
And I'll just say, as a reader, you see that answered in different ways for different
Mhm.
type of crap. Because
Right.
it's not just a blanket. There are particular reasons why Elvis is sitting on your shelf.
Right.
Rather than the multi-tool, which is
Right.
probably in a drawer someplace,
It is.
not to be touched until the time comes to move or clean
Right.
things out.
Or I need to like open a beer. Like that's when I use my multi-tool is when I need to like a can opener or something.
Right. Those rare moments when you actually need to open a can with a metal device and all that. Well, I do hope that someday when you decide that your collection on crap is too large for you and you don't know what to do with all that crap, that you remember that Hagley collects crap, as some people might call it,
Mhm.
because for us, crap is history, and
Right.
it's something great to have with us. So we can't possibly get to the full depth of the book. I try to keep these at 40 minutes or right there.
Great.
But you all should go buy it. It's a great book. It's wonderful stories. You will find personal examples of all that in your kitchen cabinets, in the bottom drawers, in your garage, in your attic, or places like that. So it's a book that people can relate to. So Wendy, thank you for joining
Thank
us.
you.
Hope you all go out and buy it.
All right. Thank you. It's the perfect present to get for the person who has everything.
There you are. And of course, the holidays are coming, and so if you don't know what to get, here you go. Well, thanks. I'm going to stop recording now.